Welcome to Skincredible, where we tell you what you should know about your skin and how to glow. 'Cause your skin's incredible.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to a really super special episode of the Skincredible podcast. We are in the company of somebody who I think is kind of a superhero because he is on a mission to save the population, to save our health by talking about the danger of microplastics. And I'll let him do a formal introduction. This is Dr. Leo Trasande.
Hi, Leo Trasande. I'm a pediatrician and direct the NYU Langone Center for the Investigation of Environmental Hazards.
So I am wearing all organic materials today in honor of this episode. I have realized that I need all new clothes because I have discovered this hidden danger of microplastics in everything. I have been researching and I read your book. Everybody, he has an amazing book, Sicker, Fatter, Poorer. It's an optimistic view of the danger of microplastics. I also watched something on Netflix that you're featured in called The Plastic Detox, which was wonderful.
Thank you.
And so first thing to start off, let's kind of level set for the audience. What are endocrine-disrupting chemicals?
So endocrine refers to hormone. Hormones are natural signaling molecules that underlie basic biological functions from temperature, metabolism, salt, sugar, and even sex. They're natural chemicals, and they operate at very low levels, like grains of sand in the Sahara, grains of salt in an Olympic-sized swimming pool, to give you a sense. So these natural molecules are fundamental to biology. And it's the principles of endocrinology that make them work so effectively at really minute doses. Now, when we're talking about endocrine disrupting chemicals, we're talking about synthetic chemicals. We're talking about chemicals. We'll talk about their uses and what we know the best. But for just right now, they are hackers of our hormone function. And they too operate in these very minute levels of exposure. We're not talking about things that'll give you seizures. We're not talking about things that will poison you the way arsenic does. There's this Swiss philosopher named Paracelsus who coined the phrase, everything is a poison, only the dose makes the thing an actual poison, or something to that effect. And I respect Paracelsus. I'm kind of jealous. His notion from 500 years ago stands largely to this day. But when we're talking about synthetic chemicals that hack hormones, we have to think about the principles of endocrinology and how hormones work. And hormones don't work in what we call straight line exposure response functions. They don't work where you have to have very high doses before you have a bad thing happen. Because of the way hormones work, you have funny curves. So the effects can be steeper than straight lines at the very lowest levels of exposure. In fact, it's actually the lowest exposures, getting them as close to zero, that can give you the biggest bang for the proverbial buck. We know this, by the way, for other chemicals like lead, mercury, methylmercury, certain pesticides that probably are because of hormone disruption, that they operate at super linear exposure response functions. And then sometimes you actually have oddball U-shaped or roller coaster ride exposure response functions, and that's based in biology as well. We'll talk a lot about bisphenols and aluminum can linings and thermal paper receipts. But bisphenol A, the prototype bisphenol, is well known to have what we call U-shaped effects because the body has sometimes multiple receptors that respond to the same chemical. And if like an off switch is turned at one point, later on, another receptor can have an on switch that counteracts the effect of the off switch. So in fact, you then have a change in function. This is all nerdy sounding, but at some level, the point I'm trying to bear is that you can take high dose animal experiments and reason down to low-level experiments, low-level human exposures. And that's why we are in this problem. We, for many years, have assumed that you can take a rat or some animal and you can do a high-dose experiment find out when you don't see any effects, and then reason down to human populations and say, okay, this is safe. The reason we're here right now is that many of these chemicals failed this test of going from high dose exposures to low dose effects in humans. And that's where we are today. And then I'm happy to go through the specific chemicals where we have very large amounts of evidence.
Yes. So you mentioned in your book that there's kind of four main categories of these EDCs, endocrine disrupting chemicals. There's pesticides, flame retardants, plasticizer chemicals, which includes phthalates, and then bisphenols, the most common of which is bisphenol A. And let me tell you, this blew my mind because I enjoy Diet Coke and Diet Pepsi. And I had switched from bottles to cans not long ago. And then now turns out neither one is acceptable.
Well, so we've talked about bisphenols already.
Yeah.
Phthalates are used to soften plastic, polyvinyl chloride plastic in particular. The pipes that are being used to replace water lines in Flint, Michigan from lead exposure are polyvinyl chloride, but they're the harder variety, so they don't get phthalates added to them. They're polyvinyl chloride plastic. But if food packaging PVC rather, gets phthalates added to it because you need that property of crinkliness and softness to work with it in real life. And that's where we have the conundrum of exposures. Now, we talk about flame retardants in the book in a way as though they're not plastic chemicals at first.
Right.
But I need to be clear that for many years, plastics, and still to this day, have chemicals added to them called flame retardants that are there because the plastic is flammable. So back in the 70s, polyurethane foams in furniture, the thought was, well, they burn too fast, so we're going to add flame retardants to slow the spread of fires. That was an epic mistake on two reasons. One is the chemicals did not work to save lives. They just magnified exposures tenfold compared to Europeans where there was no requirement to add flame retardants, period. You had just a situation where you intentionally exposed people and then the consequences followed.
Yes, definitely. And then the other thing I was learning is recycling. Is recycling kind of a myth that it helps us at all with the plastic war?
Well, let's just start with some stats.
Okay.
So if we talk about plastic, we've cumulatively only recycled 9%. So 91% goes to three fates. It export to countries where they deal with it, which then goes to two real options. They either go to landfills or they get burnt. You burn it, you create another endocrine disrupting chemical category called dioxins that are very potent carcinogens and obesogens. They chemicals that make us fatter. We'll talk a little bit more about what these chemicals do later, but the point here is that we have failed to manage our use of plastic effectively. And plastic growth is exponential. We'll triple by 2040, the production of plastic. So keeping the tap on wide open, even if we recycle our way to 30% or 40%, we're going to have an accumulation of plastic in a couple of different ways. One is an environmental fate, which we will talk about. And then the other is human exposure. And human exposure takes two general forms. We've been focusing mostly on chemicals in plastic, and I think we need to dwell on that a little bit more. But the micro nanoplastic is what woke everybody the heck up. It's when we found it in hearts and lungs and testes. I apologize that the findings and then that really caught people in a wrong spot. And we see it in ovaries. We see it in, variety of female reproductive tissue. Don't get me wrong. But unfortunately, due to the way power dynamics are and the manosphere is going these days, that seemed to really bring this issue home in a way that finally people were like, okay, I actually have to think about this.
Yeah. Well, and that brings me nicely to why we care as human beings. And there are numerous health issues that these EDCs, endocrine disrupting chemicals, have been associated with. I'm going to read through the list as I have learned from your book and from the network program. So lower IQs in children,
Yep.
ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, obesity, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, stroke, infertility, low sperm counts, birth defects, endometriosis, fibroids, breast cancer, ovarian cancer, testicular cancer. Wow.
Yeah, I'm not saying everything has 100% perfect evidence. I'm not saying it's 100% of ovarian cancer that's related to chemicals. If anybody tells you that, they're full of it because all these conditions are what we call multifactorial, multiple factors explaining a disease endpoint. So, for example, I talked about obesogens. There are 50 or so chemicals that literally make us fatter. Diet and physical activity are still the major drivers of the obesity and diabetes twin pandemics. There's nothing, no one's going to hide from that.
Yeah.
And at the same time, there's a third leg to the stool. And in that case, I'll give you an example. There's a study that successfully got people to lose weight through healthy diet and physical activity. They measured their serum for PFAS, and then they followed them. They found that the higher PFAS exposed people who had worked so hard to keep their weight off gained more weight back. Then they said, well, why is that? They found that PFAS were associated with a reduction in the resting metabolic rate that explained the effect on weight after losing through healthy diet and physical activity. So nothing I'm going to talk about here today doesn't invoke the broad milieu of genetics and diet, etc. that are important to these conditions. And then, we can go through some of these other conditions and what the evidence is. Some are really strong, like brain development effects of these chemicals are extremely strong. Obesity is kind of in the middle. Cancers are an early day field, but there's enough data from laboratory and other studies to suggest that there are 900 chemicals that are carcinogens to the breast. We know of those, 414 are in plastic. Additives, monomers, like single chemicals that make up a polymer that is plastic, etc.
Well, and 2 questions for the audience. PFAS, what does that stand for?
Yeah. Per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. In simple English, they're non-stick chemicals. The carbon-fluorine bond is a really useful thing in chemistry because it makes things not stick. And they are forever chemicals. Well, at least the original PFAS were forever chemicals because they stay in the body for a very long time because the human body also looks at these chemicals and goes, wow, they're actually pretty good. I may excrete them, but I'll absorb them right back up through the kidney. And that's why the half-lives are in the order of years. That takes years to get rid of half of it out of your body.
Was the original PFAS, was that Teflon?
That is one of the early long chain PFAS. These 8 to 12 carbon molecule chains with fluorines all over them, everywhere you could put them. And that was, DuPont and 3M have had various formulations of these compounds over the years. They voluntarily phased out the longer chain PFAS, but they've replaced a good number of them with all sorts of wacky chemistry with 4 to 6 chain carbon PFAS. Same chemistry. The only difference is they get excreted faster. That doesn't mean their biology is different.
Yeah. The other thing, and I think it's very important to say that like all of these things have some evidence to be associated with these EDCs. It varies in terms of how much there is. But the one thing I was really struck by was everything to do with like fertility and like male development. So I made note of something talking about a shorter anogenital distance. First time that word's mentioned on the pod. Yep. In babies, baby boys, is associated with hypospadias, undescended testicles, smaller penis size, lower sperm count, and fertility when they grow up.
Yeah, I've never seen so many reproductive anatomy pictures on the Joe Rogan Experience and related podcasts, but that's where this goes.
Yeah.
So the anogenital distance is the distance from the anus to the genital of depending on sex.
Yeah.
And so what we know is that represents sex hormone balance. Androgen, testosterone versus estrogen. And in boys, we're going to start with boys, but there are effects in girls too. This is not just the boy thing.
Right,
It's just
right.
that the hype about it was all about the male reproductive effects.
Yes. Typical.
It's not right, but it's just how this has evolved.
Yeah.
So what we know is that short anogenital distance is a marker of then low testosterone compared to higher estrogen function, which is not suboptimal in males. Now, what we also know is that your rank in the AGD distribution is going to be the same when you're born as opposed to when you're an adult. That's because most of the reproductive development's happening in pregnancy.
Yeah.
There's a little window called mini puberty, 2 to 6 months of age, where there's a little bit of change. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But what you are as a baby is what you are as an adult. And what we know about adults' AGD is that short AGD in males is associated with decreased sperm count, decreased fertility, and increased cardiovascular disease. We also know, this is where you have to go like this, these nerdy epidemiologists, these scientists, they need to walk you through 3 or 4 steps.
Yeah.
So I've explained that if there's something that shortens your AGD, is happening in pregnancy, right? So studies have looked at pregnancy exposure to chemicals like phthalates and looked at anogenital distance in the babies that are recently born. What they found in general is that phthalates are associated in boys with shortening of that AGD. So that's how you can connect the dots all the way to adult sperm count being lowered by plastic exposure in the womb. Now, there are some earliest studies that are saying that girls also have effects. The direction of those effects is actually longer AGD, which may represent androgen exposure. Now, there's a lot of they don't call it polycystic ovarian syndrome anymore. They call it multiple endocrine syndrome. I'm drawing a mental blank. I work closely with endocrinologists, so I'm embarrassed to say that my brain is drawing a blank about the new name of the syndrome. Yeah. But the point is that it's largely an excess of in utero testosterone exposure that explains effects in girls that can be obesity, insulin resistance, and reproductive consequences. So no study has looked that long to show polycystic ovarian syndrome in association with prenatal exposure. It's just that we've been able to show that anogenital distance is a suggestive early signal that may be a harbinger for the long-term consequences in girls as well on reproduction.
And also, I think, for those of listeners that might be affected by this, there is hope in the Netflix show, The Plastic Detox. Yes. Dr. Shauna Swan, who seems amazing, by the way, she put 6 couples on a plastic detox program over 12 weeks. And these couples had all been trying to have children for at least 2 years. And at the end of the program, 3 out of the 6 couples were pregnant.
So let's be clear. Yes, it tugs at all the heartstrings.
Yes.
And it's a study. Let's be clear. It's a study. It's a very promising finding.
Yeah.
It's 6.
Yeah.
So,
right. Yeah.
So I think what this does is give hope for the ability for people to have some power over these exposures, which is totally true.
Yeah.
I want to be clear.
Yeah.
And I don't think this is proven in the way that you're going to be able to tell a pregnant woman, don't worry about your infertility. I have a way out.
Right.
For you. I don't think we're there yet. And I think that's the yes and.
Yeah.
Not yes, but yes and to this analogy. I think it's very promising. I wasn't involved in the study, didn't even know about it till the documentary came out. It was not, they didn't tell me.
Gotcha.
As context.
Yeah.
And so it's very promising. And there are studies that show you can reduce your exposure to these chemicals in days. That's the other hope.
Yeah.
So, you don't microwave and machine dishwash plastic. You use more glass than stainless steel. You maybe filter your air for dusts that may have these plastic chemicals.
Mm-hmm.
You reduce your canned food consumption. All of those steps can add up to reductions in urinary exposure, urinary measures of phthalates and bisphenols, phthalate metabolites and bisphenols in days. And if you sustain that by the way, that's in low income and high income communities. Let's be clear.
Yeah.
So it's not a bougie thing.
Right.
It's not something that should magnify health disparities.
Yeah.
And if you sustain that intervention, you'll see hormone levels change in weeks and long-term outcomes, potentially like the ones that Shauna was trying to assess in the months and years that follow, which is akin to fertility outcomes and ultimately having babies.
Yeah.
Not everybody out there is interested in having babies as an endpoint. Some people may say, thank you, no so much.
Right.
But it's also true that you can change. There's a lot of impotence in males. There are benefits across the entire spectrum, whether you wish to conceive or not.
Well, and speaking of that, I'm a dermatologist. I'm a pediatric dermatologist. And so we have observed a few things in the world of pediatric dermatology that I wanted to just run by you and get your thoughts on. So number one, acne is happening at younger ages, and it's because puberty is happening at younger ages. And it used to be abnormal to have acne before the age of 9, and now it's only abnormal before the age of 7. Thoughts on this?
So there is something going on that has explained something in the environment. Now, hold on. When I say you got to hold that thought, that is explaining the trend in earlier. And earlier puberty in girls is known to be a risk factor for breast cancer. So it's not a clean, this is just things happening earlier in biology. So that's the first thing. So let's talk about what I meant by environment. So there are increases in obesity. Obesity is tissue that can be biologically active and make certain hormones different, particularly estrogen into androgen. We think that androgen is somewhere involved. I'm not a dermatologist, so I'm going to defer to you on the, but there is something about androgens and the way the sweat glands fail to drain and the biology there.
Yeah.
That could be behind this, first of all. Second of all, but that's my point in terms of chemicals, all the way to acne. But if we just say chemicals to, let's say, puberty timing, well, these chemicals that we're talking about, bisphenols and phthalates, are estrogenically active and antagonizing androgen in some cases. So that can do a couple different things. It can make puberty sooner or make puberty longer. And there have been a bunch of cohorts that have started to look at this. I think the jury is still ambiguous, not for the fact that some chemicals make puberty sooner. That has been pretty well established. I would say we could always use more evidence. I'm always going to say further research is needed, but we have data for action. Yeah. That's really my dichotomy here.
Well, and we've also noticed increased psoriasis in kids and a lot more hidradenitis suppurativa in teens. And
God.
Both
That's horrible to deal with.
I know. And both of these conditions do have an association with obesity. In fact, the number one comorbid condition of psoriasis in kids is obesity. And so but also these microplastics can contribute to inflammation just in general. So part of it might be the obesity part and part of it might be the pro-inflammatory part.
So I think there's two opportunities here to talk about. One is that, again, let's just hammer down on the fact that this is hard to tease apart. There's so much going on at the same time. I could also argue that diet has evolved, the carb heaviness of it, not the caloric volume, but the quality of it has gone down. So the reality is that this is a multifactorial thing, but if I can get rid of 1 to 3% of something by preventing it, by regulating a chemical out of use for its safety, that's valuable at a population level, even if you don't see a clinical increment. that is going to change healthcare provider behavior. We are part of the problem, and we are also part of the solution, by the way. We can get into that later. But the point I want to make right now that you hit on is when we refer to microplastics, sometimes we're actually really talking about plastic exposure. And plastic exposure is this complex mixture. That's the biggest thing. So I used to think of plastic as just chemical exposure. That was what I thought the micro nanoplastics, or back then we barely had the term microplastics, by the way. It's only 25 years old, 26 years old now. But the reality is that it's much more complicated than the monomers and the additives and the impurities in plastic compounds. Plastics are polymers, and with time they break up into different length pieces. And if they're really long, they stay macroplastic. They're not dissolvable. That's why you see them in the sands and the beaches and all that stuff. The micro nanoplastics start to get invisible because the molecules are getting smaller and they're getting a little more dissolvable. And it's those dissolved organic matters, microplastics, nanoplastics, and these dosh darn chemicals that are this very complex mixture. And so some of the early studies in some of which I was involved in, are just looking at the chemicals and not looking at the total plastic picture. So as we evolve our narrative here in the public consciousness, I hear the word microplastic, but I think for folks on the pod, they got to be careful about what we're really talking about, because it sometimes is really more plastic exposure and exposure to a particular type of plastic that gives you these multiple different routes of exposure that are problematic.
Well, and you mentioned earlier obesogens. Describe those. I think in your book you mentioned that air pollution contains obesogens.
There are polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons in particular that are these are organic chemicals that may be impactful. They're estrogenically active, androgenically antagonistic in some cases, and also affect receptors that are important for metabolism. It could also be that air pollution has some microplastic components that may be impactful. That's the other thing. The air pollution field is just catching up to plastic as a component. We used to think of air pollution as vehicle exhaust, right?
Yeah.
Just burning of fossil fuels. Now, by the way, plastics come from fossil fuels, so it still is a fossil fuel problem. It's different flavors of the same issue.
That made me wonder, so Vaseline, white petrolatum, was discovered around oil drills and things, and that's where we got
Of course.
Vaseline. So is Vaseline okay?
So I need to take 3 steps back, and then we'll go 3 steps forward for a minute. So I want to be very clear that there are plastic chemicals that are used in a variety of dermally absorptive products. And as you know better than I, dermal absorption is a great rapid pathway. It does what us healthcare people call skip the liver. So the liver, when you ingest something, it filters, it modifies what you're eating through bile and through other processes, because the gut sends blood volume with your food up to the liver to check it before it goes to the rest of the body. With skin, it absorbs, it goes right into the bloodstream, and it's biologically active. That's why there is a strong concern about some of these chemicals, because they can act right away when they're absorbed. Now, petrolatum's a tricky one.
Yeah.
Because it's a polymer, a mixture of materials that we used to think was inert.
Right.
And I suspect most of it is. Let's be fair. The problem is everything can have a little bit of something in this case that could be problematic. And I'm not dismissing everything as bad. I'm not suggesting that. But in this case, something that we used to think was 99% pure. I'm sounding like a certain soap brand there. But even though it's 99% pure, that 1% could be really problematic.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
And so in general, I try, but I'm not insistent on when I talk about plastic prevention, steering clear of like hydrogenated petrolatum and fossil fuel related compounds in dermal material. My attitude is, if you've got a kid with eczema, for example,
Right.
you want to make sure their skin is moisturized because there are consequences that are really adverse.
Yeah.
If your only option to that is hydrolyzed petrolatum, I can give you a whole bunch of other things to do in the plastic space that don't have to break the bank. Like when I lead with plastic prevention, I don't lead with these dermal compounds, largely because the products that are being offered as naturally derived themselves, I'm still concerned are not fully vetted for other reasons, because we know natural compounds are not necessarily safe.
Yes.
So there's a complex situation here.
Yes. Welcome to my world.
Yeah. I mean, and it's interesting because some of the I've interacted with some adult dermatologists over the years that are not so thoughtful as you in terms of framing the risks. They're sometimes like, well, it's all, like just go ahead and do your thing. I'm admitting that we have, and this is largely due to the way the Food and Drug Administration has reviewed these materials historically over the years, which is problematic on many levels. So we are behind. I'm not blaming the current administration. What I am saying is that we have problems historically in the way we've allowed chemicals to be used in products in this space.
Well, and you mentioned in your book that basically the way things have functioned is that any chemical is considered safe until proven otherwise.
Largely especially for food.
Right.
This is a huge problem. And actually for many toxic chemicals until the revised Toxic Substances Control Act. So the federal government has a weird thing with chemicals. They treat food and drug on one side, FDA. And so cosmetics and personal care products are also over there. And then TSCA is everything else, furniture, electronics, other products for sale in general, they're over there. And you can have this situation where you have two different policy spaces. They've both historically been frighteningly bad. That's why, we've had a legacy of all these chemicals going in through diet as well as through products in people's lives. It got a little better on the EPA side during at the tail end of the Obama administration, because there was a law put into place. The late Senator Frank Lautenberg had led it for many years. It finally got through after his passing. And there were improvements. There was supposed to actually be some testing before products are put on the market. The problem is since then, it's been a lot of rollback. And so we are almost, we're not really progressing the way we should, particularly for all these legacy compounds. And still the new compounds are coming in with largely a rubber stamp. They don't need data proving safety. The upside is that Europe insists on that. So there are situations where products in Europe, cosmetics, 1,300 chemicals are banned there. In US, it's roughly 11. Those numbers are maybe off by a few here and there, but that's generally the gist. For food chemicals, it's a similar situation because the Food and Drug Administration has this thing called the generally recognized as safe exemption that allows with a pen food to just have these chemicals that's why the food colorings were very unique in the United States compared to everywhere else in the world. Got a lot of attention in the eyes of the current administration. I think it's got a long way to go to undo some of the legacy damage that's been done by allowing many chemicals of concern into food as well.
And so that's all kind of the Debbie Downer parts of this.
Yes.
And transitioning to hope and actionable items.
Yes.
I made some notes about some of the things you mentioned that are relatively easy changes.
Yes.
So choose organic foods when you can.
Yes.
Try to choose personal care products that are labeled phthalate free.
Yes.
Avoid obvious plastics, plastic bottles, use glass or stainless.
Yes.
Pans. So we mentioned kind of the non-stick stuff. How do you avoid being exposed with the stuff you cook in?
So cast iron and stainless steel work quite well for most uses. Olive oil, last I checked, was good for you. From a heart health perspective. So you have a situation where you have alternatives in hand, and a cast iron pan can be fairly heavy, but other than that, it's just a matter of inconvenience. It's not a cost trade-off that we're invoking here.
And then canned food and beverages, much to my dismay, not good at all. You mentioned as alternatives Tetra Paks and oleoresin lined cans.
Yeah. So I'm not saying they're perfect. We don't have full data on oleoresin safety as an alternative, and many companies don't disclose whether the linings are oleoresin or some other material or not. In fact, BPA free doesn't necessarily mean bisphenol free, by the way. There's 140 bisphenols out there, and bisphenol S is as estrogenic, as toxic to embryos, and as persistent in the environment. But back to the point, Tetra Paks are still plastic, let's be clear. It's just that they tend to have a safer profile. To me, it's about not doing everything in one go. You can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good here.
Right.
And there are some families that aren't going to be able to do everything on that list. If you live in a food desert area, you may not have access to organic food options in the same way as others. But let's be clear, it's the leafy greens and vegetables that have the highest pesticide residue of concern. And I'm seeing big box stores coming into line with similar price points around their organic and conventional agriculture. So this notion that it is just bougie is no longer valid. It's true, but you don't have to do everything. The avocado has a protective layer that can bounce off a lot of, you're not eating that.
And then one of the other things that was heartbreaking to me as a clothes lover, fabrics.
Yes. It's a tough thing for me as a runner too, because there are, a lot of running is plastic, poly, nylon. I can't say I'm perfect. I think the biggest thing is to use a natural based layer if you can to protect yourself from the chemicals that might absorb through heat and sweat and other things into your skin much more readily as a result of using plastic clothing. We have a problem with fast fashion. There's no hiding around it. That's accelerated this problem. So you can indirectly contribute by reusing. That's the other thing is like we need to use reuse and reduce much more than recycling. And at the same time, I'm not racing to tell everybody to take out their wardrobe and completely replace it. That's
what I'm doing. That's what I've been doing the past 24 hours, Leo.
Well, you're a special human, and that's a good thing. And that, if you have it in your capacity and you want a wardrobe redo, go for it. Like, I'm not against it, but I don't again, I go back to their safe and simple steps. And, in the clinical setting, we all know 1 to 3 things. You got to write them down and be very clear about your directions to patients if you want them to receive them and actually do it. And that's going to filter through their own cognitive biases and psychological perspectives about what you're advising. I think changing wardrobes might be lower on my priority list than other things, but if you have something that has high skin contact, it's something to think about it as you're shopping,
right?
And some of those products last longer.
Yeah. Well, and for the listener, the kind of safer fabrics would be cotton, wool, linen, and silk.
Yeah.
Okay.
Generally, those are the big 4.
Okay. But yeah, I was like, what on earth am I going to wear to work out? That's my big question. It's hard.
A lot of companies now are developing wool that's a lot more breathable.
Okay.
That's probably one of the pathways, same for cotton. And so I think the tech, that's a little bit of a mental note that I got to read the label a little more carefully because I'm wondering what's added on.
Yeah.
But the technology for natural fabrics is such that you're seeing development of things that allow you a lot more latitude to navigate. Like say in New York City, it's up to 90. The heat index is near 100. So I'm sure other parts of the country are worse. You got to hydrate, make sure you're replacing salt depending on how long you're working out, etc.
Gotcha. And then children's toys, they're all plastic. Oof. What do we do?
They didn't have to be. They didn't used to be.
Yeah.
If you can, wood, other toys are important. I think this is aligned with the reduction of screen time as well.
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of devices in kids' lives that add exposures indirectly. For example, there are phosphate-based flame retardants that are many of our digital devices that then come in contact through dust and hand to mouth, etc. I'm not saying eliminate those. I'm just saying it is a challenging space, and I think that's the point that I need to make and just draw a line under is that these safe and simple steps we're talking about can probably bring your exposure down 30 to 50%.
Yeah.
Policies are going to be the grand leveler.
Yeah.
Beyond that. And if people start to ask questions about what's in their products, companies are not dumb. They're listening and they understand that the power is in our hands, actually, financially.
Yeah.
The power of a wallet, the pocketbook, etc., is going to push market share in a direction where new companies are coming in to compete out the old companies that are doing the wrong thing, or the old companies are going, well, I better buy that new company because I got to figure out how to do this right.
Yeah. Yeah. I have two other personal questions about my attempts to eliminate plastics from my life. Number one, the containers that prescription medicines come in.
Oh boy, yeah. I think we, as a medical community, healthcare community, need to have a dialogue about how we reduce our own plastic footprint.
Yeah.
We're seeing some progress on climate in healthcare institutions. I think that's getting a lot more attention. I think plastic is going to soon follow. We have a waste problem. We are a big driver of waste. You can imagine suture kits or IV setups and surgical procedures. There's lots of plastic that doesn't get used. And then what do? You incinerate it or you throw it away because guess what? It becomes suddenly unsterile. I'm not saying you don't need a backup for things.
Right.
And similarly, like what products we put in IV tubing, etc. We need to think about, these things carefully. The medical system is a source of phthalate and other exposures, for example.
Well, and then I have a home and we have an insect person who comes to spray the yard and things. What questions should I be asking them about their products?
Well, what's in their product? Get the label.
Okay.
And there's a lot of these days with AI. There's a lot of easier ways to scan and evaluate based on what are the ingredients and components. There's also this thing called integrated pest management where you don't just spray, you think. You think, where is the pest getting in and why? So last I checked, critters like food. So keeping food away from critters is a very straightforward way to reduce the attractiveness of an environment to critters.
Gotcha. Okay. And then in our closing moments, you mentioned this a little bit earlier, and you mentioned in the book the power we have as consumers.
Yeah.
Even if I don't have any power to enact legislation to help change these things, even though that's an uphill battle, we have the power of the money we spend and the products we choose to purchase. Let's close with your comments on that.
Let's talk about BPA getting out of baby bottles and sippy cups. The FDA regulated that, not because of science, because moms cried out about the presence of an estrogenic chemical in the baby bottles and sippy cups that they were drinking at high volume. Suddenly, BPA came out and levels have declined with time. We've seen some replacements come in like bisphenol S, but that's a great example of the power of the public and the purchaser in driving the change we seek.
I love that. Well, thank you so much. I feel so honored to have you on the pod. You are a big deal. Dr. T, you're a very big deal. I love all the work that you're doing, and I appreciate the time you took to talk with us. Thank you so much.
It's an honor and a joy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you guys for tuning in to this episode of Skincredible. Please keep liking, subscribing, watching, telling your friends, and get rid of the plastic stuff you can get rid of. Thank you guys.